Not Cut Out for Heroics. Written by Ended Flames. Read by Cole. Chapter 21. The Talk. Hey, Aizawa-sensei. Izuku approached the teacher after school in the same spot he'd found 1A training that Tuesday. They were doing the same thing today, basic sparring and other battle training.
Hello, problem child. Eraserhead sighed. Did you get permission to be here today?
Yep, Izuku said with a smile. I got permission from Yamada-sensei.
Aizawa shook his head. Fine, you can stay, kid. Help out my students, will ya? I need a nap.
Okay, Aizawa-sensei. Izuku grinned before heading over to Momo. Hey, Yariogazu! Please, you may call me Momo. Oh, Momo, did you like the costume design? It was beautiful. I've already sent it off to the support company that produces hero costumes. They told me I should have a new costume by next week. Momo replied, pausing on what she was doing, studying multiple mastery level chemistry textbooks at once, to talk to Izuku more. After the training session was done, Izuku pulled Kirishima off to the side. It was time to talk. Izuku was a little confused as they walked together towards the gates of the school. They hung back a little so they'd be the only ones, but Kirishima looked nervous. He was never nervous. He was all smiles and manliness, whatever that meant. You okay, Kiri? Izuku broke the silence, turning to face his friend with a worried look on his face.
I don't know,
Kirishima replied honestly, sighing.
I feel like I broke your trust or something. I made it obvious you had secrets, and it's my fault Aizawa found out.
Hey, you didn't actually tell him, did you?
Well, no, but...
Then you didn't break any kind of trust? I'm grateful you didn't tell him in front of Todoroki and Tokoyami. Besides, I think he already knew anyway, Izuku reassured. You have nothing to worry about.
Really? Kirishima asked, surprised. You sure?
You're a really good person, Kiri. It's not your fault Eraserhead found out, Izuku smiled. Did you know that Shinzo, my purple-haired friend, is Sleepy Cat?
Wait, really?
Kirishima's face broke into a signature grin.
That's so manly! I'm gonna sit with you guys at lunch tomorrow.
Izuku laughed at his friend's enthusiasm before looking at him with a little concern. Don't you usually sit with Kachan and the others?
Bakugo refused to sit with me today. I think it's because of something that happened yesterday,
Kirishima said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Oh, what happened? You don't have to tell me, of course, if you don't want to, but...
It's okay, bro. He was just being super not manly. He was insulting you and I was trying to defend you. I told him that judging people because they're quirkless isn't manly, and he told me to fuck off, and today he refused to talk to me, and yeah.
Sounds bad, but sounds like Kachan at the same time. Izuku sighed.
Have you really known each other since you were 2 years old? Does that mean you're friends?
Kirishima asked. Izuku stiffened a little at the question, moving a hand to rub his shoulder, where one of the biggest stars were when he answered. His voice was quiet, basically a whisper. No, we were friends before I was diagnosed quirkless.
Oh, dude, that sucks. That's so not manly.
Kirishima replied, looking down and shoving his hand in his pockets. Izuku shrugged. He was always told that he was the best by everyone. Well-meaning parents, his teachers trying to pick him up. He is the best. He has an amazing quirk that would be great for heroics. People like me aren't even on the scale, let alone anywhere near his league.
Midoriya, you're amazing! You're one of the coolest people I know, and it's not just because you have a viral YouTube channel. You're a great friend, and so smart and manly, and if anything, Bakugo isn't in your league.
Izuku sniffed and dragged his sleeve across his eyes, willing himself not to cry as he let what Kirishima said process in his mind. You know you're the first person who's told me that so to my face, Izuku sniffed. Kirishima stared at the floor in surprise as he stopped walking. He turned to see Izuku staring at him with tears in his eyes and on his face.
Dude, that's... What happened?
Kirishima asked. Izuku laughed, but it wasn't the happy laugh Kirishima was used to. It was a dry laugh, full of pain. Izuku sighed, not saying anything as he slowly pulled off his UA blazer and pushed up his shirt sleeve, revealing the star-shaped scars all up his arms and peeking out from under the shirt. Kirishima's eyes widened as his eyes moved from one to another. They were from Kacchan's quirk, Izuku whispered, tears gathering in his eyes again. We used to be best friends, but when he found out I was quirkless, he...
Midori, bro, didn't you tell anyone? Some of those scars look as bad as Todoroki's. Didn't your teachers do anything?
I stopped reporting when I was 7 years old, Izuku muttered, letting his shirt sleeve fall back into place and tucking the blazer under his arm. It's just made people bully me more, and the teachers told me to stop picking fights or lying.
That's terrible, man! Someone who did all that damage to someone just because they're quirkless shouldn't be in the hero course.
Kirishima said, fixing his glare on the concrete as they began walking again.
You can't be a hero if you bully people or something for something that they can't control.
Kiri, it's fine, Izuku squeaked. Kacchan will be a great hero. He won't bother me anymore. He can't. It's fine. You don't have to worry about him. Kirishima sighed as they reached the corner where he'd have to separate from Midoriya to get into his apartment. They locked eyes for a moment. At that moment it was obvious that Izuku had more experience with bullying than just burns. But there wasn't time to press right now, nor did Kirishima want to push Izuku. He'd just have to be there for the green-haired boy when he decided to open up more. Kirishima headed straight to the teacher's lounge when Class 1A let out of class for lunch. He considered going to spend lunch with Midoriya and Shinso, but this was more important. He had to tell Aizawa about Bakugo. As much as he knew Midoriya wouldn't want anything to happen to Bakugo, this wasn't something Kirishima could let go. He wasn't someone who would stand for quirk discrimination or any kind of discrimination, and the way Midoriya's arm looked, it was as if he was used to as a quirk practice dummy. He couldn't believe he'd tried to befriend the blonde after yesterday's conversation and their argument the day before. The two refused to look at each other. Mina had been asking him about it all morning, curious as to what happened. He knew she'd shipped them, so he'd just let it go. He hadn't told her, of course. Finally he arrived at the teacher's lounge, knocking twice on the door before cautiously pushing it open.
Young Kirishima, What are you doing here? Are you all right?
All Might's loud voice boomed as soon as he was spotted. Kirishima glared at the hero. Glaring wasn't his strong suit, but Midoriya had told him more about what All Might had said that day, and now he wasn't exactly a fan. And scanned the room, spotting Aizawa curled up on the couch with his phone.
Aizawa-sensei?
Kirishima asked, ignoring All Might entirely. Aizawa looked up from his phone, sighing as he saw Kirishima in the doorway.
What is it, problem child free? It's lunch right now. Shouldn't you be in the cafeteria? I just wanted to talk to you about something in private. It won't take long, don't worry.
Kirishima reassured, but,
it's about Midoriya and it's important.
Aizawa just groaned, putting down his phone and uncurling himself from his comfortable position on the couch and walking past Kirishima.
Come with me.
Kirishima was led outside the school building to an area where he guessed there were no cameras, or Aizawa wouldn't have bothered to walk for 5 minutes to get here. Once they arrived to a spot Aizawa was happy with, the teacher leaned against the wall, staring at Kirishima, who realized he was waiting to be spoken to after a few seconds of awkward silence, and fumbled a little nervously to begin his story. He told Aizawa what Izuku had told him the day before, about the argument he and Bakugo had on Wednesday, and he described the star-shaped scars all up Izuku's arm, the bigger one, looking one poking out from under his sleeve, from his shoulder. In the teacher's head, everything fell together. Bakugo was the childhood friend that Izuku had mentioned, and Aizawa was furious. Chapter 22 Teacher's Wrath. Aizawa went straight to the UA staff group chat after sending Kirishima off to have his lunch. He knew that most of the staff, especially Nemuri and Hisashi, were fond of Izuku Midoriya, and he definitely would need some backup if he was going to get the kid expelled. And Aizawa was going to get him expelled. You couldn't be a hero if you bully someone, use them as a human punching bag, and leave them scarred. It just wasn't right. Besides, now he knew for sure that Bakugo was the one who'd tried to kill Izuku all those months ago. The fact that he'd gotten off with barely a criminal record, Aizawa put down to quirk discrimination. Bakugo had a powerful quirk. They couldn't dampen his record so much that he'd lose his chance at being a hero. But now that Aizawa knew what he did, the kid wasn't getting off easy. For now, he'd have to gather allies and figure out how to expel Bakugo in the best way possible. The chat opens. That's Sawa. I found out some disturbing shit about Midoriya. Sleepy time. Huh? Who hurt my green bean Shota? Tell me and I'll... Screech! Personified. Who did the what to our bean? That's Sawa. I found out that Bakugo nearly killed him and got off with a slap on the wrist because of fucking quirk discrimination. Sleepy time. Gonna kill a bitch! All Might. Please refrain from murder, young Kayama. Sleepy time. He hurt the child! That's Sawa. He's also been bullying Midoriya since he was a kid. There are scars to prove it. Screech! Personified. I'm with Nem here. NB in space. How on earth did he get into the hero course? Surely bullying on that scale was reported.
That's Sawa. The only bad mark on his record is a case of assault, which is badly downplayed from the actual incident. I was the one who saved them. He had a broken jaw and multiple second to third degree burns.
Screech!
Personified. What? How did he get away with that?
Envy in space. They probably let Bakugo off easily because of his powerful quirk, as Shota said.
That's Sawa. That's what I assume happened.
Sleepy time. Are you going to expel him? If not, then I will. Rat Satan. I wouldn't expel him just yet.
That's Sawa. Why shouldn't I?
All Might. What is with your nickname, Netsu? Sleepy time. Is that seriously what you're taking from this conversation, All Might? Red Satan. It is something a few students have begun calling me, and Aizawa, I'd like to talk to you in my office after school. We can discuss this further in person. After a painful heroics class, literally, All Might had the class playing a competitive game of simulating hero agencies, and a handful of the students had been injured pretty badly. Aizawa made his way to Netsu's office. By now he was used to the door to the office opening before he could knock, so he wasn't faced like the first time he'd come to the UA principal's office. Ah, Aizawa, I was expecting you. Netsu greeted him politely. Sit down and have a cup of tea. We can discuss the Bakugo issue further. Aizawa did just that, though he'd much rather have a cup of coffee than tea. Well, this conversation was much more important than the beverages. First of all, I'd like to know how you came across this information and exactly how much you know about this situation, Netsu asked, leaning forward in his chair, waiting to listen to the teacher sitting across from the desk. Aizawa sighed before repeating what Kirishima had told him to the principal. He missed no detail as he spoke, making sure everything he said was accurate to what he'd been told and what he'd experienced himself. He told Netsu about how he'd saved Midoriya, his injuries then, and the inadequate charge presented by the police after questioning. Aizawa wouldn't say he was fond of the principal, but still, he told Netsu everything he knew about the Midoriya situation, and Netsu sat and listened attentively while he did so. By the time he'd finished speaking, he realized he'd been ranting angrily ranting about how Bakugo couldn't be in a hero course when he acted more like a villain. He couldn't be a hero with the record it sounds like he deserved. His middle school sounded like a whole other issue that he'd love to deal with at some point. Considering everything we've just said, I believe that expelling Bakugo may be inevitable and the best course of action, Netsu said. However, actually expelling him may present us with a challenge. On paper, Bakugo is an almost perfect student.
He has a powerful quirk, second best grades in the class, clean record aside from the assault charge, which most people would overlook. Aizawa sighed. I know the Hero Commission would never allow us to expel him without a good enough reason.
Yes, well, considering all of that, Bakugo couldn't just be expelled for having no potential like half of your students. Netsu sighed. need to gather evidence to prove that he is the one guilty of the injuries that you have told me about.
Can you get that evidence?
Aizawa huffed. He hated how Netsu was smiling, as if he had just found a reason for world domination. Or maybe just knocking a few officials down a few pegs. He couldn't be sure. On Midoriya's file, it says that he went to Eldera Junior High before dropping out in favor of online courses around 6 months ago. Which lines up with what you told me about his injuries, Netsu replied. I think that may be our starting point.
So you're going to look into it?
Aizawa asked, standing up from his seat and placing his teacup down on the desk, ready to leave the room as soon as the meeting was over. Of course, I shall update you when we begin to get somewhere. I should have at least a few leads before the sports festival begins, Netsu told him. That it was as good a moment as any for Aizawa to make his exit, thanking the principal and leaving the office quickly. When he finally arrived home, Aizawa threw himself down onto his couch without a second thought, letting out an exhausted sigh as he settled into the cushions. Hitachi quickly came over and plopped himself down on the couch next to him as soon as Aizawa had just begun to fall asleep.
Aren't you cooking dinner?
Aizawa mumbled through the lost beginnings of sleep as he was pulled into a hug.
Hitachi is taking care of it.
Hitachi waved his free hand dismissively. He was talking considerably quieter than he usually did when he was in his present mic persona, but he was still way louder than Aizawa could be bothered to deal with right now, when all he wanted to do was sleep.
How did the meeting with Netsu go? Did you expel Bakugo? No, unfortunately.
Aizawa scowled. Hitachi frowned.
Midoriya is the sweetest kid in my homeroom. No favoritism, I swear. I'm not letting Bakugo get away with this.
Hitachi wailed.
He's not getting away with it. Anything.
Aizawa yawned.
Natsu's looking into it. We need evidence for an expulsion, since he looks like a perfect student on paper.
Hitachi groaned.
That sucks! That doesn't mean I'm not going to make his life any easier in the meantime.
Aizawa sat glaring at the rug on the floor.
I hope you and Nimori don't either.
He heard the bean. He's not getting to have a good English lesson on Monday.
Hitachi glared before his gaze softened.
By the way, did I tell you I gave my kids an extension on that English project? Barely anyone finished it by today, so I let them have the weekend to finish it off.
You're too easy on your students.
Aizawa said, stifling a yawn.
Now shut up, you cockatoo, and go make sure Hitachi doesn't burn the house down. I need a nap.
Hitachi rolled his eyes and stood up regardless.
Fine, as long as you go and sleep on the bed.
Chapter 23. Class 1B. Izuku fidgeted a little as he watched another pair present their English project. They'd done something to do with Christmas and a grumpy old guy and ghosts that really didn't seem that interesting. It was nearly the end of the lesson, and Izuku and Shinza would be the last pair to present their work. That wasn't what was on his mind right now, though. He'd already spent the weekend memorizing the script and making last-minute additions to the slides, so the project was the best it could be. Right now, he was thinking about what would happen after school. Shinzo told him that morning that Aizawa had agreed to help him train later that evening. The teachers still had the after-school training to do with 1A, so their training would be afterwards. He'd also found out that 1B was doing similar training in Gym Gamma after school, so he'd had a lot of thinking to do.
Izuku Midoriya and Shinzo Hitachi! Present Mike called. You're up, listeners!
The pair of friends ran through their presentation exactly as they had practiced. They'd practiced a lot on Sunday night on a video call until Present Mike came in and told Shinzo to go to sleep. Shinzo had fumbled over the pronunciation of a couple words, but otherwise it went perfectly, earning them a polite round of applause from the class and thumbs ups from their teacher. Kirishima sat with them at lunch. They hadn't been able to discuss their secret identities, though Izuku had told both Kirishima and Shinzo the others' aliases beforehand, since Todoroki and Tokoyami were with them again. They'd ended up discussing the theories behind Ryoku's quirk, which had been going around the internet. Izuku had been surprised that neither Shinzo or Kirishima pointed out that he could theoretically be quirkless, obviously them both knowing that that was the truth. So Izuku kept quiet about it too, saying that an analysis quirk was definitely possible. Unfortunately, quirklessness was brought up by Todoroki instead.
I have a theory. Todoroki spoke up as they discussed the possibility of intelligence enhancement quirks. What is it, Todo bro?
Kirishima asked, turning to the boy who was staring distantly in his food.
What if Ryoku is quirkless and just smart?
Todoroki suggested.
It's not impossible. Midoriya proves that.
I don't think anyone's really considered that, Izuku said thoughtfully. He'd managed to get better at acting in the last week since he realized it would be suspicious if he clammed up whenever his alias was mentioned. Izuku was pretty sure he'd managed to evade suspicions from the two 1A students, for now at least. Instead of thinking about that too much, he went through the rest of the school day wondering how it would be best to crash 1B's training session. If he was going to place on the podium in the sports festival, he'd need to know about 1B's quirks too. And maybe he could help them out a little. After school, Shinzo had told him that Aizawa was going to meet them in the Gym Beta 10 minutes after the after-school training sessions with the Hero Course classes. Luckily, Gym Beta wasn't far from Gym Gamma, so he'd be able to get changed into his gym uniform after watching 1B's training and still get to his own training sessions in time. Perfect! He'd also decided that the best way to crash 1B's training would be to walk straight in there, so that's what he did.
Hey, Sensei! Who's that?
A girl with ginger hair tied up in a ponytail asked Floodking, 1B's teacher. Izuku had learned from the school's website, while gesturing to him, drawing most of the class's attention.
Hi,
Izuku said, waving awkwardly.
I'm Izuku Midoriya from Gen Ed.
Do you have permission to be here, Midoriya? Flood asked, walking over. Izuku nodded vigorously, pulling out the permission slip he'd gotten from Yamada-sensei and handing it over to the teacher, who read it over before nodding and handing it back.
What exactly are you here for then?
Well, I've been helping 1A with their training, just with advice on their quirks, since I like analyzing quirks and wanted to help. I thought it would be only fair if I came over and helped 1B too. Izuku stammered, fidgeting with the sleeves of his blazers as he spoke. Flat seemed to consider this for a second, and Izuku glanced around the rest of 1B, noticing that most of them were giving him confused looks. One blonde student was glaring mockingly at him, and the girl who'd first noticed him had a pleasant smile on her face.
All right, you can join my class in training. I think I've heard Eraserhead talk about how you helped some of the 1A kids.
Flood nodded before turning to address his class.
Izuku Midoriya will be helping out with our training today. Please listen to what he tells you, and you may now begin your training.
Class 1B split off after that. Some of the class moved to the side to practice their quirks, others joined in groups to practice one-on-one combat, and a few asked Flat for some specific training tips or using the time to study. Izuku went and sat down on a bench off to the side to observe, opening his notebook to a clean page and beginning to analyze the quirks he saw in action. It was 15 minutes into the hour training session, and Izuku had gotten a good basis on most of the quirks that were being used in the training. There were so many interesting and strange quirks that had some cool applications. There was a girl who could detach and throw the large horns on her head, and a guy with a head shaped like a manga speech bubble, who hadn't actually showcased as his quirk yet, but Izuku was incredibly curious. He had gathered a few tips from a couple of people and some questions he wanted to ask. How strong were the girl's horns? Could she use them for mobility or only projectiles? Could she control them telepathically, or were they just throwable? But he still wanted to spend a little more time watching before he went over to offer his assistance. As soon as he'd returned to his notebook, after a couple of minutes of watching the class, though, he was approached by none other than the blonde who had been glaring at him earlier. He'd hoped not to have to talk to him. The look on his face scared Izuku a little, but apparently the universe didn't appreciate what he wanted. Hey! Aren't you supposed to be helping us? Not sitting here scribbling in a notebook? He asked, bending down and getting a little too up in Izuku's face for comfort. I need to know what your quirks are before I can help you guys with them, Izuku muttered, shuffling sideways on the bench a little away and hiding his notebook against his chest. How do we know you're not just getting information for the 1A brats, so they can beat us at the sports festival, huh? He glared suspiciously. How do we know you're even here to help? I'm not even part of the hero course. Why would I be here if I wasn't here to help? I'm not obligated to be here. I could leave if you want, Izuku squeaked, shuffling a little further away from the blonde. Monoma, leave the guy alone, the ginger girl from before came over. The blonde Monoma glared at her. Kendo! I'm trying to make sure he isn't spying on us for 1A. I heard him mention them earlier, Monoma protested. Kendo gave him an unimpressed look, before turning to Izuku with a sigh. I'm sorry about him, she said. He has a problem with 1A for some reason. Izuku nodded, looking cautiously at Monoma, still clutching his notebook to his chest. Do you want me to tell you what I think about your quirk? Will that make it better? Go ahead, Monoma scoffed. I bet your analysis isn't even that great anyway. Right. Well, you copy quirks, right? Izuku asked, getting a nod of confirming his suspicion. Well, that's a really cool quirk, and it would only work if you had quirks to copy. If you were against someone with a quirk that wouldn't help, like a mutation quirk, for example, since I assume you can't copy those, that would be weird. You'd need to know how to fight quirkless so you'd be useful in as many situations as possible. It would also be a good idea to do extensive quirk research and get familiar with any quirk that could be good to copy in a fight. It would also help knowing that quirks would be good together, assuming you can copy multiple at once and which counter each other best. It might be a good idea to get familiar with your classmates' quirks since you'll be around them a lot and their quirks would be easiest to copy on short notice. Izuku stopped talking as he realized that both Kendo and Monoma were staring at him. Had he done something wrong? Were they upset? That was so cool, Midoriya! Kendo was the first to speak. Did you really just think of all that just now? Yeah, Izuku said, smiling. At least Kendo was nice. He still wasn't sure about what was going through Monoma's head, though, right now. He seemed to be blue screening. Monoma? Are you okay? How the heck did you know all that about my quirk? Monoma said, seemingly snapping to his senses at the sound of his name. I was just watching you training with ground softening guy. Sorry, I don't know all your names yet. And I saw you copy his quirk and get your feet stuck in the ground. Izuku trailed off as Kendo laughed. I guess researching different quirks might be helpful. Monoma sighed, embarrassed that his slip-up with the copied quirk was noticed. He didn't think anyone had seen. I could help if you want. I like researching quirks, Izuku smiled. I have 14 notebooks full of quirk analysis. It's mainly hero, but maybe it'll be helpful? Why would I get help from you? Monoma spat. You're with the 1A lot. Get Izuku corrected. I just have a few friends in 1A. Still, Monoma said stubbornly, you work with them. I'm really here helping 1B right now, Izuku replied, wondering if helping this guy was really a good course of action since he'd been nothing but rude so far. Kendo elbowed Monoma, getting his attention and giving him a meaningful look. The blonde sighed before glaring at Izuku. Fine, you can help me, Monoma huffed, looking a little defeated. Izuku smiled a little bit. Cool, if you wanted to, work on fighting quirkless, like I said, Eraserhead agreed to train me and my friend after this. I'm sure he wouldn't mind someone else joining us. What the heck was Izuku saying? He had no idea why he was inviting this stuck-up blonde kid to join his hero training, but his fighting needed work. His sparring match had ended incredibly quickly after he'd gotten stuck in the floor, but in the short time he had actually been fighting, he hadn't even been able to block the attacks properly. Even Izuku with no training could tell that his stance was all wrong and the few punches he threw were flimsy and wrong. How the hell did you... That doesn't matter, Izuku interrupted before standing up. If you want to come, we'll be in Chimbeiro after this training session. I'm going to talk with the girls who can throw her horns now. Alright, see you later, Midoriya, Kendo said, heading back to where she was training so far, leaving Monoma standing with the blue screen look on his face. That was the beginning of one strange friendship. Chapter 24. Bakugo's consequences. To say that Shinzo was surprised when Midoriya showed up to their training session accompanied by a rude blonde boy was an understatement. He could tell that his dad, Aizawa-sensei, was just as surprised as he was when Izuku introduced said blonde as Monoma from Class B, saying that he needed help with training too, so Izuku had him tag along. Monoma wasn't exactly the nicest person Shinzo had ever met. That position fell to his dad's and Midoriya. But he was nowhere near the worst either, and no matter how rude he was about 1A, the guy seemed to have a weird obsession with them, though he stopped refusing to listen to Aizawa. For being 1A's homeroom teacher, after Midoriya told him he'd never get anywhere without training, and Shinzo threatened to brainwash him into doing the chicken dance in front of the whole class. No, the whole school at lunch. Aizawa seemed to find this whole scenario vaguely amusing until they actually began training. Their teacher didn't lie when he said he was serious about this. Of course, Shinzo had the most training out of the three of them. Living with pro heroes had its perks after all, even if it hadn't been enough to pass the entrance exam. That meant that he could help out Izuku and Monoma with their more basic training they were starting out with. Aizawa appreciated the help since the teacher was still injured from the USJ incident. It was interesting, especially since Monoma still refused to take criticism from anyone but Midoriya. What exactly his friend had done to get on the blonde's good side during 1B's training session must have been good. Why do you hate 1A so much anyway? Shinzo asked, sitting down with Midoriya and Monoma on the bench after grabbing a water bottle. Why do you care? Monoma spat. Jeez. Okay, don't need to be so rude, Shinzo said, putting his hands up defensively. Monoma huffed before turning away. I'd actually like to know too. What did 1A do to upset you so much? Izuku spoke up, rescuing Shinzo from Monoma's wrath. We're supposed to be rivals, Monoma answered. They think they're so much better than us just because they got to fight a few villains at the USJ. Our field trip got cancelled because of that. I didn't even think they know we exist half the time. You know, several people nearly died at the USJ, right? Shinzo said, including Eraserhead, 13, and a few of the students. Wait, what? Even All Might struggled, apparently, Izuku piped up. According to my friends in 1A, things were looking grim until the other teachers showed up for backup. Why do you think Eraserhead is still wrapped up in bandages just like that? He gestured to the teacher across the gym, who was still mostly mummified. Apparently Todoroki and Kirishima were injured too, but their injuries weren't as bad as they were healed by recovery girls straight away, so they were pretty much fine. They were hurt? Izuku asked, a surprised look on his face. Why didn't they say? They probably didn't want you to worry, Midoriya, Shinzo said, giving Izuku a deadpan look. You worry about people you don't even know too much, let alone your friends. At the first comment, he sent a pointed look at Monoma, who just looked confused. He was impressed by my analysis, and I then decided he's probably too, interested in being everyone's rival to realize he needed help on his own. I'm still here, you know, Monoma huffed, crossing his arms and glaring at them both. Right, Well, just please tone the rivalry thing down a little, Izuku said cautiously. I wouldn't be surprised if half of 1A had trauma, and bringing up the USJ might not be a good idea. Monoma sighed again. Fine, whatever. I won't bother them about the USJ. The week of school that followed was intense. He'd spent his Wednesdays meeting with Netsu, doing a comprehensive knowledge test created by the principal. The questions had been a lot more difficult than he was used to, but he was pretty sure he'd done at least average on the questions. While he'd been working through the test, Aizawa had come in to discuss something quietly with Netsu. Izuku hadn't really been listening. It was rude to eavesdrop, and he was focusing on the test. But he'd caught enough to know that they were working on a case that they'd almost gotten to the bottom of, or something. To do with a middle school that Aizawa wanted done before the sports festival. It was interesting, but it wasn't Izuku's place to pry, and he had a test to finish. In the week before the sports festival, Aizawa and Netsu had been working on securing evidence for Bakugo's expulsion. They had decided to try their hardest to get the case closed, and Bakugo gone before the sports festival, before the world got to see him as a hero student, before anyone would be able to protest because he'd placed highly in the festival, which would be almost inevitable if he did compete with his competitive nature and powerful quirk. They'd managed to arrange a meeting with the principal of Aldera High School so they could get access to the security footage. That meeting was on Thursday, and Netsu had been the one conducting it, since Aizawa had an obvious bias that he was more than happy to admit to. The meeting had gone surprisingly well. The head teacher of Aldera had rambled on and on about how amazing Bakugo was, and that he'd be glad to give them the footage from last year, assuming they were going to be using it to promote Bakugo. He'd promised to send them all the footage of the last few years that they had, and after Netsu had told him that he better send it all with an ominous "or else," the man had been allowed to continue about his day. They had gotten the footage back in that night, and what they saw was disturbing at best. A horrific case of quirk discrimination, bullying, and neglect at worst. Aizawa had barely been able to watch the scenes Netsu had selected from the footage, a compilation of some of the worst interactions between Bakugo, along with some other kids, and Midoriya. The worst ones had been when the teachers were present and did nothing to stop it, though. A few teachers ever quietly praised Bakugo. It was sick. By far the worst scene, though, happened almost 11 months ago, the same day as the slime villain incident that had been on the news. The scene playing on Netsu's small TV in his office shook Aizawa more than he thought it should. Bakugo destroyed the kid's notes, throwing the book out of the window, before rounding on him, burning his shoulder, before telling him to kill himself, and leaving the room laughing. That was it. Aizawa had seen enough. "Do we still plan to expel him?" Aizawa asked. He couldn't help being hopeful.
"Well, I think that's debatable,"
Netsu replied, and making Aizawa scowl.
"I think we should offer him a place in Gen Ed if one is to open up, on the condition that he stays away from the Hero Course students. I only believe this since he needs an opportunity to change his ways. He has been taught wrong for most of his life, and it seems and deserves an opportunity to correct his behavior."
"But we can't let him become a hero with an attitude like that."
Aizawa nodded with a sigh.
As long as we can make sure he and Izuku stay separated, I won't have him put into Genet if Izuku is still there.
I agree, which means this option will only be available to them if Midoriya and Shinso are transferred into the hero course after the sports festival.
So this is all riding on Midoriya on Monday's festival?
Exactly.
Katsuki wasn't sure what to expect when Aizawa interrupted their class in the middle of the third period, requesting that Katsuki join him in the rat's office. It wasn't really a request, more of an order, so Katsuki had growled at their teacher but stood up and stormed out of the room anyway. To his confusion and annoyance had multiplied when he'd reached the office to find not only the rat but the hag and his dad, who was cowering in his chair.
Ah, Bakugo! Eraserhead, our final guests have arrived. Now may we begin?
What is this about? The hag asked angrily.
Our Katsuki hasn't done anything. Quite the contrary, actually. Now please be quiet while I show you a compilation of the security footage we've acquired,
Netsu told her, effectively shutting her up before turning to press play on the television remote and beginning the string of videos. Katsuki's dread grew as he realized what the videos were. Security footage from Aldera, namely of him beating the shit out of Deku most of them.
Is that Izuku?
Mitsuki screeched on the third video, unable to contain herself anymore. She went to round on Katsuki before Aizawa answered her.
If you are referring to Izuku Midoriya, then yes.
Oh my god! The poor kid! Katsuki, what the hell?
Mitsuki yelled before she was shushed by Netsu, leaving Katsuki to slouch a little in his seat. He didn't want to watch these videos. He wasn't sure why he was being forced to. The hag was going to kill him after this if UA didn't. The tape finally ended after what felt like hours, but wasn't one bit relieved. The last clip had left the room in silence. Even the hag was speechless. Why did they have to end it on the one of him telling Deku to off himself? Were they trying to make him feel terrible? Scratch that, they probably were, and it was definitely working. Every pair of eyes was now on him.
As you can see,
Netsu spoke up, his voice cutting through the tense silence,
we have discovered that Bakugo has a history of this behavior. These were not all the instances of bullying and quirk discrimination that we found. However, these were the main cases.
Mitsuki couldn't seem to form words for once, so instead she just waited for Netsu to continue.
Izuku Midoriya is one of our students here at UA, meaning we are planning to take this very seriously. His record was mostly clean. However, it seems that is only the result of the Aldera's quirk discrimination, meaning that Bakugo got off with 0 consequences for his own actions.
Netsu continued.
Unfortunately for you, these will not be the circumstances here.
What are you going to do? Expel him? Mitsuki found her voice again, though it was filled with broken pride. She glared at Katsuki with disdain. She knew he'd assaulted someone, but she hadn't known it was Izuku. Inko hadn't told her a thing.
He will be excluded for a 2-week period, after which, if a space is made available after the sports festival, he will be allowed to come back to UA as part of the general education's course, or alternatively, you'll have to find another school. No matter the choice, he will not be able to take part in the sports festival, Netsu replied. Mitsuki looked like she was thinking it over.
Fucking hell,
Katsuki muttered. The hag sighed. It'd be better if Katsuki stayed at UA. Katsuki's father spoke up for the first time. It's been his dream for years, and I'm sure he'd prefer Gannett than another school.
Yeah, what the old man said.
Bakugo huffed angrily, accepting the fact that he wouldn't be allowed back into the hero course now. Mitsuki sighed, her usual enthusiasm and general loudness gone at the situation, and nodded, unsure of what exactly to say. She was definitely calling Inko as soon as they got home.
Will you be all right taking Bakugo home now?
Netsu asked them. Yeah, Mitsuki nodded, standing up and grabbing Katsuki by the shoulder. Come on, Brett. We've got a lot to talk about. Chapter 25. Sports Festival Preparations. Inko frowned when she saw the caller ID. Mitsuki was calling her in the middle of the day. That was odd. She picked up the phone quickly before it could stop ringing and lifted it to her ear, only to flinch and hold it away from her as her friend yelled down the line. Oh my god, Inko! I'm so glad you picked up! I really need to talk to you! Mitsuki yelled into the phone, sounding frantic and worried and maybe even a little guilty. What is it? Inko asked, panicking a little. Not much could worry her friend enough to call her acting like this. Katsuki got removed from the UA's hero course! Mitsuki wailed. Inko stiffened. Wait, what? And that's not even the worst part! Inko wasn't sure. She wanted to know what the worst part was. Of course, Mitsuki was going to tell her anyway. The principal, he got some old footage of Katsuki and Izuku from Aldera and well, it's not pretty. Inko was in tears by the time Mitsuki was finished with an explanation of what Netsu had shown her. She'd known, of course, that Katsuki was the one who'd hurt Izuku when Eraserhead had brought him to the hospital, but she'd never have guessed the extent of Katsuki's actions. The boy had told her son, her baby Izuku, to kill himself. Quietly sniffling, holding the phone away from herself in a pathetic attempt to stop Mitsuki from hearing her tears, Inko tried to wipe them off her face. Mitsuki was silent on the other end of the phone before sighing. Fuck it! I'm making komikis and coming over, Mitsuki huffed, hanging up before Inko could protest. When Izuku got home that day, he found his mom in tears and a half-eaten plate of cookies that looked like they'd been baked in a rush. She'd engulfed him in a hug and told him she was sorry. Izuku had no clue what had happened or what she was sorry for, but he'd assured her that he was okay. Mitsuki told me. She told me what Katsuki did to you and at Aldera, Inko whispered, noticing her son's obvious confusion. At that comment, though, he stiffened. You don't have to talk about it, but I'm just glad we got you out of there. Izuku found he was unable to reply, so he settled for just nodding. Why didn't you tell anyone? I tried. They just never did anything. Telling people just made it worse, Izuku squeaked. Inko softened, looking at him with teary eyes. I'm so sorry, Izuku. It's not your fault, Mom. It was the teachers at Aldera, mainly. Izuku trailed off. It's not happening at UA, right? Inko asked him almost hesitantly. No, never. The teachers are so nice, and I've told you about my friends, Izuku yelped. That's good. Mitsuki made these cookies, by the way. You can have one while I make dinner if you want. Thanks, Mom. The next week had gone by in a blur. After school on Monday, Izuku and Shinso had stopped off at the development studio, hoping to ask Powerloader about support gear for the festival. Instead, they'd gotten blown up twice. And Midoriya had become a test subject for a crazy inventor girl. Hey, Powerloader Sensei? Izuku asked tentatively, sticking his head around the giant door of the development studio. Shinso looking in over his head. There was a gasp and a clang from inside before the door was flung open by a girl with wide eyes and pink hair styled in dreadlocks, who Izuku thought he remembered from somewhere. Hello! Who? She gasped as her gaze locked onto Izuku. She stopped forward, getting uncomfortably close enough to his face as he tried to step back, only to bump into Shinso. Beach Boy! Beach Boy? Izuku squeaked awkwardly, trying to back up as she got close again, even though he had nowhere to go. Yeah! She yelled before jabbing a finger at his chest. You're the boy who's been cleaning Dagoba Beach! It clicked in his head. This was the girl who Izuku always saw scavenging for parts there. He nodded, unable to find his voice as he put his hands up in front of him, trying to put some sort of barrier between them. So, what are you doing here, Beach Boy and friend? My name is Izuku Midoriya, and that's Hitoshi Shinso. We're here to see if we can get support gear for the sports festival. Izuku phrased it like a question, but the girl in front of him grinned. Perfect! I'm Mei Hatsume, and I've got some babies I think will be perfect for you two. The next hour was spent in the support department, trying out a load of different babies, one of which had spooked him so much he'd jumped on Shinso, who had managed to catch him before he fell onto the floor. They'd ended up with only a few things each. Izuku had a pair of jet-powered roller skates. The concept sounded weird to begin with, but he'd taken to them instantly when he tried them on, which helped a lot with speed and maneuverability. But they'd need a bit of practice for him to be stable on them, as well as a pair of goggles that let him see through smoke, paired with a bunch of smoke bombs he could keep in a belt that had multiple pouches for different items and weapons, though he wouldn't be using many. Shinso had gotten himself a similar scarf to Aizawa. Mei had explained that it was made using a specific shape memory polymer. It wouldn't seem like magic, like the teachers, but it would snap into shape if Shinso sent heat through it, which was a function, of course. So, he also had gotten himself a voice changer. It was nowhere near a professional model, but it would do for the short term. It was a small device that worked a bit like a harmonica, weirdly. When they had gotten to their training session afterwards, carrying their support items that Mei had been happy to give them, she still had the blueprints, and it would mean more publicity for her babies anyway. They were both covered in soot. Midoriya was also covered in sticky pink goo, which had sprayed from one of Mei's contraptions. She assured him it wasn't toxic and that it would wash out thankfully. Aizawa had allowed them to practice with their new gadgets while he helped Monoma with a few evasion techniques. He'd definitely need them if he was going to get close enough to someone to copy their quirks. Izuku had gotten used to the roller skates quickly. The jets helped him with sharp corners and jumping higher and further, but it was easier to skate normally without them, since they messed with his balance and propelled him a little too much. He'd gained too much momentum when he tried it and ended up crashing into a wall. He was glad May had made the jets toggable from a button on the belt. She'd really thought about how usable they'd be. Izuku had no doubt she'd make it in the support sector. When Aizawa saw Shinso's scarf, he smirked. Shinso had glared at him and then gone over to the other side of the gym to practice using it. After 15 minutes, he'd gotten a basic hang of it and asked Izuku to practice with him. Izuku using his skates to dodge and Shinso trying to catch him in the scarf. It was good practice for both of them. Another half an hour later and Aizawa got Monoma to join them. The hero student would have to attempt to copy their quirks without getting caught by the two Genet students. It had proved difficult and taken a few tries, and then of course there was the whole ordeal when Monoma tried to copy Izuku's quirk. Especially since Shinso didn't know he was quirkless either. It had never really come up in conversation, not that Izuku really wanted anyone to know anyway. And Aizawa had respected his privacy and kept it a secret as well, even from his son, as much as he thought it was stupid to keep it a secret. "What the hell?" Monoma yelled, looking at his hand after slapping Izuku's cheek. It had left a mark, but Izuku had assured him it was okay. He'd only gone for the face since the boy kept his arms covered even when he wore his gym uniform for a reason. Monoma had yet to discover. "I copied your quirk! Why didn't it work?" Both Shinso and Monoma looked at Aizawa, assuming that he'd cancelled Monoma's quirk or something. Izuku smiled a little. It was probably a more logical conclusion than him being quirkless, but Aizawa shrugged. He hadn't done anything. Then Monoma had realized something else that actually made Izuku laugh out loud. "Wait, my quirk is gone! What the hell did you do?" Both boys stared dumbfounded at Izuku as he laughed while trying to explain himself. Monoma, you... Oh my god, I didn't think it would work like that!" Izuku laughed. Monoma scowled. Aizawa hid his face in his scarf, hiding a smile as he realized what had happened. "What did you do to me?" You copied my quirklessness," Izuku managed to wheeze. "You're quirkless?" Shinso asked almost instantly as a look of realization hit his face. Monoma just stood stunned for a second. Izuku nodded, his laughter stopping, replaced with a nervous smile. You guys aren't going to hate me now, right?" Izuku asked, worriedly. "Of course not! We're friends, right?" Shinso said. "You didn't turn away because of my quirk, so why should I hate you?" Monoma took a little longer to reply. "Yeah, I'm basically quirkless half the time anyway, and I'm still in the hero course, so why should it matter?" The smile on Izuku's face widened a little after he let out a sigh of relief. "Thanks, guys. Let's keep going." Tuesday, he'd found out what happened to Kachan. He'd heard that the explosive boy was missing from 1A at lunch from Kirishima and then asked his mom about it when he got home. She'd burst into tears again, saying this was what she found out the previous Friday and told him everything, leaving Izuku with a lot to think about. Would Kachan join Gennett if he managed to get into the hero course? Is that what they meant? Well, now he not only had to make the top 4 in the sports festival for himself and Shinzo, but for Kachan too, so he could keep his place at UA, even if it wasn't in the heroics department. Netsu's lesson on Wednesday had been interesting. The rat had asked him his opinion about his old middle school. And then, after he answered truthfully, "I think they're incredibly biased. They put the kids with strong quirks on pedestals and make them believe that anyone with a weak quirk, or no quirk, should be taught their place. It hurts. Not only the weak, but the strong too." The principal had smiled before asking him how he'd feel about trying to take them down a couple pegs, and they'd opened up the beginnings of a case together. The Friday before the sports festival, Shinzo had decided to drag Izuku to 1A's store after school, claiming to have heard about some kind of commotion going on. When they got there, they found out that about 30 people were gathered outside the door. A few Izuku recognized from 1B and their own class, but most were unfamiliar, most likely from other classes. Shinzo, what are you doing?" Izuku yelped as he found himself being dragged to the front of the crowd, helplessly apologizing to the student who had been shouldered past by Shinzo. After a few seconds, he had found himself standing in front of 1A's door. "Hey, Shinzo! Midoriya!" Kirishima yelled, recognizing them. "Get in here! We're being mobbed! We could use some backup!" Izuku happily took the opportunity and got out of Shinzo's grip, going over to greet Kirishima and Todoroki and sending a wave to the others. After a minute of contemplating, Shinzo dropped his initial intent of declaring war and joined them as well, letting some of the more social members of 1A try and talk the mob into leaving them alone. It was fun for the 2 Gennett students to watch. The rest of the week had gone by in a flash, and suddenly it was the day of the sports festival. Inko had wished him luck as he left in the morning, promising that she'd be watching him live and waving as he left. Izuku sat with Shinzo in the 1C waiting room, wearing the support gear he'd filled in the forms for the Friday, waiting for their class to be called to prepare to enter the stadium. He'd already been to visit both 1A. He definitely felt Kachan's absence, even though Inko and Kirishima had both told him what had happened. It was still strange. And 1B, who'd been all but stunned when Monoma wished him good luck in return. Now all that was left to do was wait.
"Class 1C, please prepare to enter the stadium,"
said the intercom speaker in the corner, followed by the loud scraping of chairs as the class headed towards the exit. Izuku smiled, standing up and turning to Shinzo. "We're going to do our best," Izuku said, smiling. "We're going to get into the hero course, and we're going to be there together."
"We can do this."
Shinzo nodded before following Izuku out of the door, his new scarf around his neck. They entered the stadium to the cheering of the crowd. It wasn't as loud as the cheers for the hero course, but it was still there, and there were still a lot of people. Izuku absent-mindedly wondered if his videos got more views than the amount of people in the stadium. He wasn't sure, but even if his videos did get more views, this was absolutely more intimidating. He was here in person, being watched in person. Everyone was watching, and they'd see any stupid mistakes he'd make. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be here, but he couldn't back down now. The sports festival was about to begin. Hello again, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. And today I just saw how many of you are there. Already nearly 90, and oh my god, I never thought I'd get so far. And thank you so much for all the support and this just started out as something to try out, and now I really like it, and I want to do more, and I think I really thank you for waiting and all, and this is so cool. And I'm really glad for everyone that listens to silly old me trying to do an audio, well, a podfic. It's just, thank you so much. Hey, for 100 subscribers, I might do a one-shot special. Post in the comments what fics you would really like to hear me read, and hey, and don't be shy to bring in other fandoms as well, next to Boku no Hero. Maybe some other languages do you want to have read? Next to English, I speak German and French. Though French is less good than English, but I'll try my best. I really hope everybody will have a nice weekend. And I'll see you soon, or hear you soon. Bye, guys, gals, and non-binary pals.